Welcome to Marriage IQ, the podcast for the intelligent spouse.
I'm Dr. Heidi Hastings.
And I'm Dr. Scott Hastings.
We are two doctors, two researchers, two spouses, two lovers, and two incredibly different human beings coming together for one purpose: to transform the stinky parts of your marriage into scintillating ones, using intelligence mixed with a little fun.
Hello and welcome back to Marriage IQ, with the podcast for the intelligent spouse. We are your hosts, Dr. Scott Hastings and Dr. Heidi Hastings.
Yep. Welcome, everybody.
We have a guest today. We're really excited to kind of spread our wings a little bit, get some more perspective on some of the things that we're teaching. And we are pleased to have Dr. Ray Doktor today. Did I pronounce that right?
It's Doktor, but it's okay. But if you think about all the songs that have been written with Doctor, I'm totally cool with that.
Okay.
Robert Palmer's like from the 70s, and I think there was some other songs from the 80s that had that same lyrics in that also, but it doesn't matter to me.
So either one works. Okay.
Here's the big question, though, Ray. Is Doctor really your last name?
It is. It is.
Or Doktor is really your last name?
Yes.
Well, how fitting then that you're a doctor.
Yeah.
That's really great.
I always ask people this question, particularly clients who reach out to me, and that is, they'll say, is that like there's a spinoff of you being a doctor? I'm like, no. And then I'll ask, did you think that was a little bit cheesy? And they usually say yes. I'm like, if you want to work with me, some guy like changes his, because it's spelled D-O-K, not D-O-C.
Right.
And they're like, well, we read the reviews. We felt a good vibe. I'm like, okay, all right, I'll go with that.
Well,
awesome.
Dr. Ray Doktor, he is a best-selling author whose book was published by the team behind the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. With a doctorate in clinical psychology and over 28 years of experience as a life and relationship coach, Dr. Ray has shared stages with some of the most influential voices in personal development, including Marianne Williamson, Bruce Lipton, John Gray, and Eckhart Tolle. His experience has been featured on the E! Channel, HBO, and KCAL 9 Los Angeles, as well as in Psychology Today, Men's Health, and the Los Angeles Times. Dr. Doktor, welcome to the program today.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're really glad to have you.
So, you intrigued me. You really put yourself out there. I see you're a musician, you're an author, you're a doctor.
With a very interesting life story.
Very interesting life story. And one of the things we talk about on Marriage IQ is identity. And part of that identity is really trying to get to know people. And I think your unique history kind of feeds into that. Would you like to share some moments of childhood development?
Sure, absolutely. So what's interesting is I did a in-person podcast. It was Thursday, and I have never been more raw as possible. And we went really deep with even when I had been arrested for a DUI. And the funny one was stealing suntan lotion from Kmart, with no shirt on, put it in my short and running. And I don't know why, maybe I really wanted a tan in the 80s or something. But to answer your question more directly, I wrote about it in my book as well. Part of who I became started with having 2 near-death experiences. I fell from a building, 3 stories, and was possibly almost dead for about a minute. And then it happened again when I was 16. So
you fell from a building twice.
No, the other one was overdosing on PCP.
Okay.
Wow.
That definitely was a kind of a wild child. But
I heard about your experience driving as a 12-year-old.
Well, I guess you saw that. So I used to pick up my friends with my mother's Chrysler LeBaron from their bus stops, where they would be waiting for the bus and pick them up, and we would listen to Led Zeppelin and The Who and just rock out. And then so I wouldn't wake up my mom. We would open up the garage door. It had an electric garage door, but if you pull the handle, it became manual, and we'd lift that the garage door open, and I would punch it, put in neutral, turn off the engine, and roll it in. Perfect park. So
LeBarons they're convertibles, right?
They had convertible ones also. You remember?
Okay.
Yeah. But
Well,
so back to your question is that my real changes began when I was 14 and I was a star running back and I broke my leg and fractured it in 14 different places. And at that time, that was my identity. Having people look at me like that guy was good at sports to whatever social currency I'd be able to attract. And
Mhm.
then when I broke my leg, like it was as if no one saw me, like my identity was just shattered. And I went into, for the first time, of like depression, I guess. And there was a teacher named Miss Jenkins who did not like me, and I did not like her either. And she just got right next to me and she said, you need to stop feeling sorry for yourself. And that shook me. And it was true. And then that led to me, it was during the times where, men would wear makeup, the new romantic movement to punk and all of that. And so I kind of did transformation, like as if I was Ziggy Stardust, and I showed up to school looking way different. I remember getting all this positive attention, and that became kind of my persona. I played in the band, and then many more experiences in my life where I reinvented myself. I went through that, um, I guess, re-identifying myself, and I think we all try to connect to something that we could be so others will look at us a certain way, respect us, love us, and everything else. But typically, it's like we're adding things onto ourselves. Typically, it's social status, it's all these things. And it's taken me a long time to learn that. That doesn't build confidence. It's an inner journey to find out who we authentically are. And so
that's
that
right.
journey from there led to, yes, I had been arrested for drinking and driving. That led me to seeing a therapist for the first time. And he said, I don't know if you have a drinking problem, but you create a lot of problems when you drink. And I definitely had some hidden anger and other things that I was resisting. And then, like, my early 20s is when that kind of opened up that path to start really exploring myself and reading self-help books, seeing a therapist, and even during that process, I still was dabbling poor choices like a lot of young men. But ultimately, it was to arrive here to whatever this version of me is now, hopefully happy.
So you were reading self-help books when you were in your early 20s.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
That's
Dang.
unusual. Can we go back even before anything that you've talked about, but go back earlier than that to your childhood? What kinds of experiences or identity did you have from early childhood that maybe led you to be the wild child?
Well, first off, my father was in the Marines for almost 30 years, and that just was part of his personality. He was like,
Yeah.
he had this kind of like maverick. I mean, my dad kind of had that attitude like Tom Cruise played, where he'd been in the military for a really long time, and he kind of always pushed against the status quo, particularly if there was injustice or whatever. And so that's just part of my personality. But when I was a small child, like well, first off, I had really bad asthma.
Mm,
So my early memories of my childhood when I was 2, 3 years old was getting shots for my really bad allergies
mm,
and being separated from other children and immediately feeling different just because of that alone. In addition to that, I also was born with my feet crooked. So I wore braces just like Forrest Gump, literally
mm.
Oh, wow.
up until,
Okay.
yeah, from 3 to 5 years old. And so I was singled out. I looked different and was
Yeah.
made fun of. So you can see where
Wow.
things kind of were shown up in a way where I kind of was forced to kind of look at myself differently. And then when I was 6 or 7 years old, I developed trichotillomania. So I was pulling my hair out and I had bald spots.
Mm.
And so those are like 3 different childhood experiences where I had to figure out who I was, or that I had been deprived of something, or it's when I experienced the idea that I'm different from other people. And I think it kind of forced me to also be with myself and have to work through that. In our world now, a lot of kids don't have that rites of passage. They're hypersensitive. They don't really have that emotional strength. And I was also, I'm half Okinawan. And so I was in this very kind of redneck town that was primarily Christian. So I also experienced racism.
Mm.
My mother would show up to school to pick us up in a kimono. So just all of those things, I guess there could have been another boy. He, you would interview like this and ask, how did you end up in prison? Or how did you end up being a drug dealer? They can blame all these same reasons. Or you can ask someone like myself, and I can say, well, I was kind of forced to like just basically accept the fact I'm different. And we all are in our own beautiful, unique way. And
Right.
so what? So how am I going to make the best of it? And so it began from that space. But also, again, my dad, he was a great leader. He really had firm boundaries. And so even while there was the world outside there and kids were using drugs and doing crazy things, he raised me on integrity. He raised me on taking accountability. He raised me on being a good human. So I think even when I dabbled in those things, it was really experimental. It wasn't an identity. It was, sure, maybe I wanted to check out, but hey, it kind of felt fun smoking weed and going to Knott's Berry Farm. It was experimental, but I don't think it was because I was feeling really bad about myself.
So let me see if I get this right here. So you have this childhood with several different types of trauma, including a near death experience, the racism, these other just being excluded. You're wearing braces, the Forrest Gump. Yeah,
Mhm,
uh, all of these excuses to blame other people.
mhm,
And yet it sounds to me like you had a great role model in your father. You brought up your father who taught you at an early age about firm boundaries.
mhm.
And do you feel like that helped you? Because look at you now, right? You're this author, musician, you're a speaker. There's a lot of things that have led you to be where you're at. How instrumental was having these role models, including your father, in your childhood and youth?
I think it was everything because my father as well had to go through many challenges too, such as my grandfather, his father, died when he was 2 years old.
Mm.
His mother took on a second job. She was one of the first female deputies in a Bronx. I even saw her certificate. So she was kind of a badass, but she opened up a newspaper stand as well across the street from Yankee Stadium, where Babe Ruth actually took my father to some of the games.
Oh.
So my father started working at a very young age also to support the family. And so what I grew up with is people who were survivors, people who didn't play into victim mentality and just kept moving forward. And including my mother, who was just amazing also. Here she was living in Okinawa, where the patriarchal system there is where if the firstborn, which was a boy, stays with the father. And she was not in a healthy relationship. And she tried to lean in and fix things, but her husband wouldn't. She walked away from that marriage and was ostracized from her entire community. And even her
Mhm.
son there, I have a half brother in his 70s who I never met. Uh, she did that in the 1950s. And my father married a woman and she ended up being an alcoholic and he had two boys with her. He divorced her and raised two boys on his own. A single father from the 50s, a man who
Wow.
was like showing up. All I have seen is two individuals, my parents, just keep showing up no matter what, choosing what is right no matter what. And
I
even if
kind
it's
of
gonna cause conflict, even if others might not agree with you, you have to be your authentic self.
That's really powerful.
That is an empowering message, and I have a feeling that that's going to be a theme of the rest of what we're talking about today.
Okay.
Tell me a little bit about so well, and this brings up too, we talk about this. Some of the things, our genetics, our trauma, our experiences, they are an explanation, but not an excuse.
Mhm.
So they can explain some things about our behavior, about our personalities and what we do, what we think, but they do not excuse us from the poor choices that we make.
Hmm.
So I really like that empowerment. Let's talk a little bit about how that sense of self came to be. I know you touched on it a little bit with growing up, and you read through several self help books when you're fairly early age. What are some high level takeaways on sense of being, sense of self, and how that interplays with a spouse or a significant other?
So, what I'd like to do first is talk about trauma because that's brought up so much. And often what we hear is that that person is acting this way because he or she has unhealed trauma. And that continues to be the narrative. And I'm not dismissing that people haven't experienced something in a negative way. But what I've discovered after working with over 6,000 clients is that it is the way that the client hasn't fully integrated the experience in a way where it makes sense to him or her, where they start feeling a more trust to their decisions moving forward, to where they even locate where the tension of the experiences in their body and they're able to release it, to where they're no longer waiting for an apology or just still kind of going into that monkey mind of why did he do that to me, to more like, why do I allow myself to be bothered by what he had done? And I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
So I wrote about it in my book. It's called All It Takes Is One: Drop Your One Big Hidden Belief and Master Your Life. And I wrote a little section in there about trauma because I used to specialize in helping people move through it. And in there, I share how my son, when he was still living with his mother, he lives with me now full time. And this is actually the experience which led to us agreeing that he'd be better with me. She was living in a bad area and she was holding my son. He was 3 years old and she got a gun put to her head and was robbed. Okay.
Wow.
So, of course, she was scared in that moment. However, for my son, how would he know the difference? How would he know the difference? And so, 6 months after the event, my son said, some gorillas took my mother's purse. So, from his little, cute, innocent mind, he remembered these people as gorillas because they had masks on. And it was a very
Mm,
innocent interpretation, no trauma,
mm,
nothing. So fast forward 2 years later, where he has watched TV, where he's seen people maybe do bad things or someone steals someone's cheese in a cartoon, he starts formulating a new type of memory of it, such as he was more aware of it to finally, when he was 6 years old, he was sharing the experience of one of his friends as if he was fully alert as a 3 year old. And I stopped him. I said, Max, when that happened, you had no idea. You actually didn't even know that there was danger. You knew nothing about death. You knew none of those things. And, he laughed about it. I laughed about it. That experience has not imprinted his life at all. Whereas if there are other adults, other people saying, "Oh my God, what happened to you?" to 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 years later, to where he now is creating a story that I should have been afraid, or there's something wrong with me for not being afraid of this, then it could have turned maybe into trauma. And so, what I'm trying to share here is that because I've worked with a lot of people who've had to move through trauma, typically it's those first who don't actually say anything about it. They remain silent for years. And it's this negative thought.
Mm.
They start developing this really lack of self worth because they keep blaming themselves. They feel guilty. They feel like they could have done something different rather than talk about it and connect to something that actually feels better than just that alone. They have other people who tell them how they should feel. And suddenly, when they start having emotional problems or they're displaying bad behavior, then it becomes about this, you must be acting this way because of this trauma you had. While trauma can influence you, it does not dictate how you're going to live the rest of your life. With my son, remember, his mother had a gun to his head. And I know most parents who hear this go, oh my God, their fear comes up, not
mhm.
my son's fear. It's very important to recognize that things we experience, that it doesn't mean like absolutely it's going to continue to be a traumatic experience. In fact, the question I ask is, why is it that this one thing that was so hurtful, something I don't even think about anymore? Why is it that that really bad breakup with that guy who I was totally in love with doesn't even matter to me? I don't even know who I was in love with. Like, there's some things that had happened to us where we just forget and let go, and then there's some things that we don't. And
Mm.
we need to ask those questions. Why is it particularly those events? The hardest one is when it's a child is molested by a parent, when someone he or she totally trusted betrayed their trust. Well, of course, this child probably is going to have a lot of trust issues. It's more difficult. But what makes that experience more difficult, it's when the kid is lost with his or her own thoughts that they did something wrong, that they feel that shame in their body as they go through this, the way that their mother looks at them to like they're contaminated, or they're in a religious culture where it's projected onto them that they're no longer clean. That is what creates the trauma in the body. It's a really poor sense of self. And so the body is not able to integrate that in a way that makes sense for that person who had that bad experience to live out their life in a healthier and happier way. We all have the ability to do that, which I share explicitly in my book, ways to do that. So people throw around the word trauma, I think, too much. And I'd rather say that while the experience feels like trauma, I would say this, that the way you integrate it still doesn't make sense. The way that you have created a story around it, it's not supporting you in this now moment. And we need to start changing that story within. So no matter what had happened back then, that doesn't become the totality of who you are today.
So, is there another word you would use? We use big T, little t trauma, but
Yeah, that's
um,
yeah. I think those are good words too. But I also recognize that I might have a different belief system. So, as an example, people will say my ADD or my ADHD. So, I feel as though when we start using labels for how we are, it's still not allowing us to step into some personal responsibility to maybe shift that or to improve that anyway. I think it's important to recognize maybe I'm forgetting this stuff because I'm not interested, actually, to my mind's distracted because there's something else that I need to give my attention to. Very often we just don't want to get to the root, like be as transparent and vulnerable as we like to kind of own something. And this doesn't mean that there's not people out there who have a hard time focusing or who have PTSD, but I've seen over and over again people handle that stuff better when they recognize that they can have a better sense of control of it, and when they start giving themselves a story that supports them no matter what happened back then or what the consensus reality outside of them says about it.
so I think it sounds like you're answering this identity, sense of self, by using trauma as if trauma is still persistent in your life, that shows kind of more of a reflective sense of self. Whereas someone who's more comfortable with who they are, their sense of being, they're able to work through that trauma in a way that's faster, shorter.
More empowering.
Yeah. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be true. For an example, I would say more this, that people who have had something negative happen to him or her, that there's a life philosophy and a way that things should have turned out that's somewhere within their consciousness as well.
Right.
As an example, women in their late 30s or 40s might feel like they haven't lived a full life because they haven't had a child. There are people out there right now even have this philosophy. My marriage or my relationship isn't working really well because I saw the Brady Bunch and they seemed happier than us. Like, we're comparing ourselves. And so when we start really looking at why we believe these things in the first place and realize it's actually maybe a lot of bullshit, then we recognize, wait a minute, I'm trying to model my parents' culture. Why don't I just own that I'm different and I would prefer to be this other way? And being authentic and being connected to what you might say as a true identity is really, really owning that and figuring that out. In fact, in my book, there is this section where I take a reader through the main 11 influencers of our Western culture that we all have to face at some point. It could be how we have come to know about our sexuality. It's about what we were taught in religion. It's about how we were indoctrinated in the area we grew up in or our college. Many of us are running on programs that are not even ours. And so, of course, if you are unconscious to your consciousness and you're trying to make life work by the unconscious mind that these programs are not even who you really are, you're going to fail over and over again. It's never going to work. Just imagine if my father were to be this billionaire and no matter what, I just don't do well financially. And I'm thinking that my ultimate success is to be like my dad. Then I would always fail. I would never live up to that. I have my own path. And so we have to become really honest with that story of who am I really? Like I mentioned, that I was great on the football team, but it wasn't like I'd ever go professional. I want to be honest about that. I have been different versions where I thought, oh, this would get me the respect or the woman, but I still felt insecure. I remember being 25 and having an amazing sports car and thinking, oh, I got game. And I remember I was pretty insecure. Like that car wasn't helping me with my game.
Mhm.
And so when we realize these things, then it's like we're left with, okay, if it's not outside of me, then it's within. What stories do I need to change about myself? How do I love myself more? And what ends up happening too is that until we get to that space, if we're in a marriage with someone, it's easy to blame him or her. It's like, my problems are because you this, you that. And when I work with couples, what I do typically is, did these emotions exist before you met Hank? How was it like in the relationship before Hank? When you grew up in your home, is there any similarities to Hank like your dad? And more than often, you'll see this pattern like, oh, yes. Okay, so you haven't stepped up to take personal responsibility. You have still ignored the red flags. Maybe when you were younger growing up, you couldn't just walk outside your house or you'd be physically hit. But you are now a grown adult and you have choices right now. And you don't have to be with Hank if you don't want to. Or maybe if you worked on yourself, you would see a different version of Hank.
So I want to go back just a little bit. What about mentors? Someone you look up to.
Mhm.
I know you said you need to live your own life, right? Because I don't know really who I want to be. I've always read this quote. It's "To thine own self be true," by Shakespeare. And I remember thinking, I don't even know myself. So while I agree with Shakespeare, I think it's only part of the solution. I think that for me anyway, to have mentors to look up to, take the good parts of them, not try to be just like them, like you said, a billionaire or whatever. Like I have a mentor for humor, a good friend
Dave Tenney.
who I look up to that I, in some ways, try to emulate, not copy, to help myself develop my own identity. Because a lot of times we ask ourselves, what is my identity? Right. And even as we age through the years, it continues to change. So
Yes.
we're dealing with the safety and security, the confidence of who we think we are, together with this, I don't know, I can't put a percentage on it,
Who I want to be.
who I don't know I am yet because I'm changing, I'm getting older. So there's always that portion of my identity that's really unsure, which is a little nerve-wracking sometimes. But
It's a forever unfolding process because our consciousness is forever unfolding with new information and emotions and everything else. Even when I became a father, there was this old identity that I had to let go of. And like, for example, the idea of buying a minivan was like horrific for me. But why would I want to cling to the idea that I needed to be in a Porsche and just be like this free man if I really feel free in my heart. And so becoming a father, when I became a father, I was still playing in an 80s parody band where we'd wear wigs and
Yeah.
makeup and rock out on stage. And I remember that the real shift happened. It was at the Blue Beat in Newport, and it was 1:45. They're closing the bar, and at the time, I just had become a father. Maybe it was a year one or year two into it, and my friend Amy, who's his godmother, was watching Max. And I got off the stage, and some attractive women came up to me, and they said, "Do you want to go to Denny's with us?" And I didn't think about like, "Oh wow, here are some attractive women." I thought about, I want an Epsom salt bath. I want to relax my body. I am tired, and I'm a dad now. And that was the moment I just surrendered and went like, "What's more important?" Doing the same shit I've been doing since I was, you know, uh, a teenager, a young adult, or this other thing that actually was giving me responsibility and some type of purpose. That definitely changed my life. But even now, I'm going to be living in a new area. I
Mhm.
don't know what that's going to bring up, but I haven't played music since 2020, and I have guitars and everything. And people are asking, when you get to Asheville, are you going to start a band? Because most of my friends have only seen me in bands, plus doing what I do here. And I'm like, sure, sure. But there's this other part of me going, I get tired at 8 p.m. now. I get tired at 9 p.m. Like, it would have to be day shows. I don't think I'm that person anymore. And I have to accept that with grace, you know? So,
There is one of your songs. It's called "All I Really Need." Give me love. Right? Did I say it right?
yeah.
So I was listening to that earlier, just some of the lyrics. Is that some of your philosophy here? Because I notice it kind of goes along with the theme with the Beatles. All you really need is love, right? And then
Yeah. Yeah.
ultimately for us, that
Yeah.
We're
from
Beatles
a
fans.
high, like a 30,000-foot view, that's
Mhm.
really it. Is love, right? But I wanted to
Yeah.
kind of get your idea on your thoughts since you wrote it uh, about love and how that all ties in with your
Well,
identity.
my response, by the way, I'm not going to ever compare myself to Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin.
Uh,
I'm born the same day as him, but he's when people ask the song he never wanted to be asked questions about. In fact, supposedly when he was in Oregon, he paid 10 grand to a radio station to not ever play Stairway to Heaven again. So I don't know why, but when he shares about that, he shares about his 24-year-old version. So it's hard for him to identify with what he was experiencing back then because now he's a man in his 60s or 70s. And so that song was written in 2001, but already I was on a spiritual path and journey. Yes, it's all about all you really need is love. And in the lyrics, it talks about meeting with a shaman in a sweat lodge also, and it's about this man kind of searching for answers and recognizing that it's right there within.
I love that.
And kind of a cool thing too that so there is a on the bridge you hear a guy announcing something. It sounds like a game show, and it says, "Contestants, please cast your souls." And that whole part of the lyrics is more about like we're here to have life experiences, and I believe that we continue, if you want to call that reincarnation, I don't know, but it's just that don't take life so serious because all we have is forever. Most of us, when I say most of us in the Western culture, we will discover that we have these outdated beliefs about ourselves. So I have a chapter in my book, and I chose probably the most common 11 influencers, such as a traumatic experience,
Okay.
your relationship to spirituality or religion,
Mhm.
how you're raised to understand sexuality, to even your primary caregivers, whether it was your parents or your grandparents, to even the first one is the prenatal period. Because when I started doing this work, I used to do like rebirthing sessions, and I would have clients remember what their mother was feeling,
Wow.
like them feeling insecure because they're gaining weight, their father's not there for the mother, and then the baby's feeling that energy. There's a book called The Secret Life of the unborn child.
Hmm.
And he basically like gave birth. He was a doctor in that process and documented everything that had happened with 20 different women. And then he interviewed and used hypnosis with those children. And it's uncanny what those adults today now said. And one of this young adults in hypnosis and says, I'm somewhere where it's really exciting. And all of a sudden there's explosions. And my mother, and that's when his mother's water broke.
Mm.
They were at a carnival, 4th of July.
Wow.
And as a baby, he took in that impression. And so through hypnosis, he revealed that that's what happened.
Well, I want to know the name of your book again. Say that.
Oh, I'll put it up here.
Okay.
It's All It Takes Is One. Drop your one big hidden belief and master your life.
Okay. So is that one deep hidden belief different for everyone? Or are
Yes,
you finding
absolutely.
commonalities in what that one deep hidden belief is?
Everyone has different hidden beliefs. However, when you typically go deeper than just that one hidden belief, more often what comes up is that that person lacks trust in him or herself,
Mm.
bottom line, or trust in the process of life. It's trust.
Trust.
Yeah.
So how do you heal that? How do you correct that belief that was not serving you or me?
Is there a personal example you can give me and I can work with that? Or
Sure. Sure. I really struggle with self-esteem. I have a PhD, probably several things from my first marriage, from maybe childhood, different things. I really struggle believing that I can be successful.
so, first off, how do you define success?
Ooh, that's a really good question.
That's in the book. So, just for a moment, yeah. So, imagine if your definition of success is like what I mentioned, the billionaire father, of course, you would fail. Okay.
Okay.
Two, you said, I don't know if I'm smart enough, even with a PhD. I mean, listen to how I talk. Like, I grew up on the streets, and so I'm pretty raw. And I've been through a lot of experiences that people would be embarrassed to share. And I was the same way, by the way. I was the same way, Heidi. I remember teaching, and I was in LA. And I don't know why I kept attracting professors from UCLA and asking me where I got the material. And then I think after the third professor who's challenging whether or not I was smart or not, I asked my mentor at the time. By the way, yes, Scott, I believe in mentors. Absolutely. Forgot to answer that. He said, I didn't have that problem, Ray. He says, are you questioning yourself? And I went, yeah. He said, well, stop
Mhm.
doing that. And they will too. So I really did stop. They never showed up again. I believe in law of attraction. So it's, what are you questioning about yourself? Forget about what everyone else thinks. It's, how smart do I need to be for me to know that I'm smart? Because logically, and probably with taking tests to whatever else that qualified you to be smart, you probably are smarter than most people on this planet. Okay. Like most people don't get a doctorate. That's
Right.
just a fact. However, the story would be like, well, how smart I need to be, or how smart do I need to know I need to be okay to be me? It would just be turned around
Yeah, during
because
my doctoral program, I would not allow him to say I was intelligent or smart. Those words just made me burst
Mhm.
into tears. I would say I work hard. I'm a hard worker, and anybody that works hard can accomplish anything they want to. It's
True. However, what if it's this? What if this became easier for me? What if I can actually ease into life better and be a better receiver? What if the reason why words don't work is because already I'm blocked. And how can I receive Scott's, his eyes looking at me because he knows it, but I need to know it. How can I look in the mirror and see that within? And again, it's just coming back to yourself. How smart do you need to be to be yourself, because periodically I see stuff. I see myself, how I pronounce words. Sometimes I don't enunciate clearly. I'm like, wow, I'm better than I was before. But it's like no one really cares. Like if
Yeah.
anything, like most people have something they think they're hiding, and the people that are in their close circle don't even see those things, or those people in their close circle see those things and love them anyway. So why work so hard to be something that no one even cares for you to be either?
Ooh, I love this. So this is really good because you're talking about, again, the stories that we tell ourselves. We are comparing ourselves to what we think other people's expectations are.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I love that you said, oh, I kind of messed that up, but I see that I'm better than I used to be, which after a year with Marriage IQ, I can see that I'm better than I used to be. But I haven't really stopped to consider the fact that most people don't even care or notice every little thing that stresses me out about my voice, about the things I say, about
Mhm.
being able to carry on an intelligent conversation. And so I'm
Yeah.
holding myself back.
You have this husband just loves you. He's like looking at you, and he wants you to know these things already. I could just see it. It's kind of beautiful. My son, he had speech delays because he wasn't breastfed. There's a whole long story about that, but meaning that like he had speech delays, and it still came up a little bit, but he probably copied me as well. And I ended up seeing from that same company a speech therapist, and it was just so I could speak clearer. And I never practiced. I think it's like it was over a year ago. I have something here to do, and she told me to slow it down and everything else. But whenever I feel bad about how I talk, all I have to do is watch Hugh Grant or someone else who just stutters, stammers, or whatever. I just saw the King's Speech last week. I was like, oh my god, this movie's amazing. He's trying to take the king through his childhood, where his father stifled him when he would talk,
Mm.
and so there was trauma there. But like, and then there's that moment where uh, the king, he's not a king yet, but he wants him to read, and he thinks it's foolish. And so the teacher starts blasting music in headphones so he couldn't hear himself read the book, and he reads perfectly.
Mm.
Perfectly, because he's not in his head. And when we're not in our head with those old stories, we are so freaking amazing. We are so amazing.
Stories that we tell ourselves really matter.
Mhm. We all have these like overarching beliefs about ourselves. And that belief usually impacts 2 to 3 other areas of our life.
Yeah.
And when we get to that, it shifts. And if you want to go even really deeper, if you get into meditation, hypnosis, or whatever, and really connect to your spirit, your soul, you'll recognize, oh, this is the life I chose also to heal this by experiencing the opposite. I grew up being pulled away from children right away and other people. A lot of people are looking at their phone right now on Instagram and feel disconnected.
Hmm.
They're driving next to their partner and they feel disconnected. So at an early age, I guess I chose this theme in some shape or form to have to be with my emotions and have to be with myself. And that gave me an early start to find out who I really am, which continues.
Yeah.
Wow. That's really deep. A lot of topics for a very long discussion, I'm sure. But we've run out of time here today.
I think this gives people who want more an opportunity to go look at your book and uh, take a deeper dive into some of the things that you've brought up today. Are there other places that they can find you?
My website's the best one. I'll give you a link to my website. It's raydoktor.com. It's RAYDOKTOR.com.
Okay.
And from there, you can get to my YouTube channel. You can get to everything I'm pretty much doing.
Okay. Very good.
It's great.
Thank you for being with us today,
Yeah,
Dr. Doktor.
we really appreciate this. This has been great. Do you have any parting word of wisdom?
Just be you. Be you. We all have a story. And just hopefully that story you have is more loving about yourself. And that's it.
Thank you so much. Well, that wraps up this episode of Marriage IQ. And remember, the intelligent spouse knows that to change from a stinky to a scintillating marriage first requires a change in themselves. Follow Marriage IQ on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube for more great content on this topic. Head on over to marriageiq.com to grab your free ebook on building a scintillating marriage. Keep exploring, and we'll catch you next time on another exciting episode of Marriage IQ.
Have a great week, everybody.